All right, so it's past 5:30. Let me go ahead and call to order this special meeting of the Board of Finance for Thursday, February 4th. As we have done in our previous meetings, I wanted to make sure we had a chance for there to be any public comment. I didn't see anything come over email. Jennifer, was there any outreach to you or actually anyone else in terms of public comment or questions that we might answer before we get started on the formal agenda? None. Okay. All right, so the purpose of this meeting is to discuss and take action on a special appropriation that the Board of Education has submitted to us with regard to COVID-related reopening expenses. I'd say to start the conversation that this actually came up as part of the budget process last year when we were discussing the magnitude of potential expense in this regard. At that time, and arguably even today, there certainly at the time was a great deal of uncertainty as to what would be required to meet those legitimate needs with regard to protecting our students, their families, and of course our faculty and staff. And so one of the things that we committed to as part of that process was that as these expenditures came into focus and we knew exactly what they were, and the Board of Education had to start spending money to make provisions for these protections, that the Board of Education would keep track of those expenditures, and that when it came time to get a supplemental appropriation to cover them, that we as a Board of Finance would meet right away to examine that request and make sure that we came to a conclusion on any appropriation and got that appropriation request and recommendation directly to the RTM as soon as possible. So this all came to light, has been building obviously for a few months now, but came to light as a formal request to the Board of Finance last week. And so what we have before us is that request to cover these expenditures. So that list has gone around to everyone. The aggregate request actually is $2,384,934. That request covers a number of expenditures that the board has had to expend to essentially deal with COVID, and they range from additional teaching staff, personal protective equipment, campus monitors. There's a whole list of those expenditures that are included in the materials that were sent around that, of course, will be made public. That particular expenditure, though, is offset by a grant that they have received. And what I'd like to do is stop talking here, and I'd like to give Dr. Adley, Duke, and Rich a chance to maybe describe their appropriation request in more detail, and then give us all a chance to ask any questions that we may have. So with that kind of opening comments, Duke, let me turn it over to you, and you take it from here.
Sure. Thank you, John, and thank you to the rest of the Board of Finance. As you stated, we submitted the request for a special appropriation after our last meeting for the $2,384,934. As with a lot of things, we knew there was potentially more supplemental government funding coming our way, but fully understanding the timing of that, when we submitted the $2.3 million. Literally, I think 3 days after, we got confirmation of the, hold on, I want to get all the terminology right, of the supplemental SR2 grant. And that grant is $596,805. So we had a similar ESSER grant in the beginning of the year. Rich and the administration know the process. The state opens a portal. They are to submit COVID-specific expenses through that portal for reimbursement. So we've been through this process before, and Rich is ready once we have access to that portal to submit expenses associated with that ESSER grant. I don't know if Dr. Adley or Rich, you want to add anything else to that?
Sure, just by way of introduction, thank you for the opportunity to come before you this evening. I would like to recognize our administration and our teachers in particular for the tremendous work that they have done through these very challenging times. I would like to thank the Board of Education in making funds available for the health and safety of our entire school community, and which impacts also the community at large. I would also recognize and appreciate the fact that the Board of Finance indicated early on in the process that that they would make us whole on COVID expenses that we felt were necessary. I'm particularly proud of how long our children have been in school and the nature of the learning that they're doing at this particular point. I think I would say you've got a great return on investment for the expenditures that we have done here thoughtfully, judiciously, and very carefully. We monitor these, as you know, with our monthly finance committee. They are taken into review there. They're brought before the board on a monthly basis. I think you'll find that they're well accounted for and documented accordingly. I want to recognize Richard for his organization in that capacity. But suffice to say that we come before you this evening. We've spent about $3.5 million on expenses. They have been offset with grants of about $650. And now we came before you with the appropriation request of about $3.3 million as you see it. And the recent news, as John mentioned and as David mentioned, Luke mentioned, the ESSER 2 grant has come forward with about 596,805, and so that we can attribute expenses, COVID expenses, right to that particular grant. We have done so for the other two grants, with that were for 134 and 347, and certainly those the COVID expenses align to the categories for which we can submit for ESSER 2 grant. So with that, I'm certainly happy to open up the floor for questions or review.
Yeah, one question for me, the schedule that you provided that talked about sort of total spending, grants received, it also has in there approved transfers, which I'm assuming is transfers from other parts of the Board of Ed budget, and there is ones that are approved that total $364,000, and there are some pending transfers for $285,000. Can you talk a little bit about those transfers and how they're used to offset these expenditures?
Sure. So the biggest ones were, we did have some lower enrollment, primarily in kindergarten, than expected. A lot of parents held their students out. So we did transfer savings from lower sections into the COVID RC to cover some of the teaching staff. We did have some savings in transportation. So instead of 180 school days, we had 177 school days. We've had some remote days. Athletics has not been a typical school year. So we've seen a significant decline in transportation for athletics. So we've taken some of that money and moved it into COVID RCs. We've had some after school clubs that aren't running. So we've taken some of that money and moved it into the COVID RC as well. So any identifiable funds that we were able to save throughout the school year that really had to do with COVID, we made an effort to bring to the board to approve a transfer to kind of offset some of those costs.
Okay. Let me open it up to the rest of the Board of Finance. Anyone have any questions for the Board of Education team? Dan, please go ahead.
Gentlemen, I think you guys have done a great job articulating how you managed through this last cycle. What do you have a perspective on the prospects for any further grants, either that are in the works at the state or federal level, or that might be in the works? And if there were further grants delivered to the district, how would you anticipate utilizing those funds? What would the timing be, and how would they be credited back against this appropriation?
So that currently that there's not particularly announced, but at the federal level they are considering a grant, and we would have to look at eligible COVID costs for that. Typically it would fall into the same sort of category, but we do have a board meeting tomorrow with the Board of Education around COVID expenses. So it would be a bit premature for me to say how that would align. But essentially, there's a potential for additional funding to come forward. That's not a definite. I don't know if there's any other update on that.
So the only thing that's been discussed is the federal government has talked about a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. And in that supposedly is another allocation of resources for schools, not necessarily for the current school year, but potentially for the next school year. I would imagine if that ends up getting approved, it would work pretty pretty similar to how the ESSER Part 1 and ESSER Part 2 grants work. So they would be reimbursement grants that we would have to submit for.
Thank you.
Other questions? Jim?
Yep. Rich and Alan, as you think about the next 5 months of the school year, are there any items that could cause this number to go up or down? Any specific sort of operational changes or other concerns you have?
So if we're fully remote, primarily at the elementary level, we won't pay the LPNs. So they are contracted service. They are 4 of the 5 elementary schools, the exception being Topeka. So any day that the elementary schools are fully remote, those are days we wouldn't pay for those LPNs. If we're fully remote for an extended period of time, so as an example, that first week in January, the district was fully remote. We don't bring in the contracted cleaners for the weekend. So it's about a little over $8,000 every weekend. So that would be another item that could go down. If we're in school for, in full for a period of time, we would probably expect to see more quarantining of staff, which could drive that substitute number up slightly. If we're out more or hybrid more, some of the losses that we see in our food services account are likely to increase. If we're in session fully, those losses would likely decrease as more kids are in school to purchase school lunch. And then, so those are primarily really the ones that can fluctuate the most. And then lunch monitors would be another example. So if the middle school and the elementary schools are fully remote, obviously we're not serving lunch in the schools, and then we would not pay those employees because they're hourly employees.
An example of that might have been our 2 snow days that the kids didn't get.
Fair enough. Other questions? Rob?
Not as much as a question, but more compliments to the staff of putting this schedule together. I kind of think back to when the budget process we had all the way middle last year, when it kind of finished in May and June. We talked about as much detail as the Board of Finance could see on any particular appropriation we want to sign off on. This is great data. So just my compliments, Rich, to you and the staff and everybody there for putting this together. It looks fantastic.
Terrific. Other questions? Paul?
Rich, on days where you don't require busing, say hybrid or totally remote, do you get any relief from your bus contract?
So for in-district transportation with first student, it's 85%. For out-of-district transportation like Rely or ACS for special education students, we aren't paying anything.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific. Other questions? I guess I had one other, which was in this appropriation, Jennifer, all of the requested appropriation actually comes out of a contribution from fund balance. And I just wonder whether you'd given thought as to whether it should all come from fund balance or whether any part of this would come out of the Board of Finance contingency or other sources as opposed to just a complete fund balance appropriation.
I think it would be best to do it all from fund balance and save the contingency for other smaller items that might come up. This has to go all the way through to the RTM anyway, so we might as well do it just as one package. And then if we don't use all the contingency money, that'll help replenish fund balance at the end of the year.
Okay. Taylor.
I'm just noticing in the chat room that our agenda called for public comment. I think a lot of our guests were not able to get in time. I don't know if you want to go back.
Certainly, we could do public comment. I'm actually seeing those chats as well. Jim, you've got the tiller on this. How do you want to do that?
Yeah, I guess, John, did you receive any emails in, or do we just want to do a hand raise if the public?
I could do a hand raise. I did not see any emails come in, so I don't have any unless you had some, Jennifer.
No, I have not received any.
Okay, I'll let you control who's coming in for public comment. Jim, go ahead.
Okay. Does anyone have public comment? If you do, raise your hand on the bottom part of your screen. I don't see any hands raised. Do any of you?
Well, I'm also a child of the 20th century, so I'm the last person to actually ask as to whether the technology is working.
There were two comments from people who said
Yeah.
they had questions.
Yeah, Carolina and Teresa, I don't see that.
I would say to those on the phone, there was a problem with Channel 79 just shot me a text a few minutes ago that there's a problem in the booth broadcasting this live to the YouTube channel.
Okay,
But I would tell everyone, rest assured that this is being tape recorded. And so I think within 15, 20 minutes of this meeting ended, it'll immediately be uploaded to Channel 79's YouTube channel.
okay. All right, I'm not sure what to do next on this. Does anyone else have any comments or questions about this appropriation?
John, I just echo what a few of you said before, in that I think the way that the administration, particularly Rich, filed the reports and tracked these expenses, the revenues, the expenses, the transfers from categories, and the explanation that we saw, generally at every Board of Ed meeting, as well as like their monthly finance meetings, was, I think was great. The reporting was made tracking this very easy, and just really want to applaud him for the work that he's done.
Yeah, I would certainly second that. Okay. All right, so what I'd like to do is take a vote of the Board of Finance to recommend for appropriation $1,788,130, which is the original $2.384 million request, less this additional grant of $596,000, I believe $804 or $805 that Dr. Adley mentioned. So that leaves this net appropriation out of fund balance, as Jennifer suggested, $1,788,130. Can I get a motion on that?
So moved.
Dan, second. Paul, all in favor of that? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. I guess the final thing I would say is just to repeat what I said at the beginning, which is these are pretty serious times, and the need for readily available funding to ensure that we do all we can to protect our students, protect their families, and protect faculty and staff. Certainly the Board of Finance takes that very seriously, and we want to make sure that anytime there is an aggregation of these expenditures that you all have had to make as a board, that we respond immediately to have the discussion about an appropriation to make sure that you have the financial resources to meet those important requirements. And so certainly by convening this meeting within a few days of the request that came out just last week, hopefully we fulfilled that request, and we actually called a special meeting today as opposed to waiting for our regularly scheduled meeting later this month, so that Jack Davis and F&B would have a chance to consider this. I think they're doing that next week, and their recommendation combined with ours could go to the full RTM meeting this month. So just as fast as humanly possible, I think, was our objective, and hopefully we're meeting that against the meeting schedules that we have available. So very important to us, and hopefully these funds get to you with as quickly as possible. I would further say that as more of these expenditures come into focus throughout the rest of this fiscal year, we certainly would like to entertain any appropriation requests that you may have as additional expenditures are made. So we would certainly convene as quickly as possible, as I've committed to previously, to do that again. So that's about all I had to say on that. Does anyone else have anything to add?
No.
John,
There's a couple of comments in the chat room. Jim,
Okay.
John, does it make sense? They're short. Does it make sense to read them as part of public comment?
Be happy to do that. Let's see. Yeah, I'm sorry that for some reason we can't get hands up or identify who wants to speak. Let's see. Somehow I can't raise my hand. I just want to say as public comment that I support the appropriation. Absolutely. So do we. And to thank the administration for their hard work. And I've got to multiply that by 2. The work is really just exceptional, and it's easy to read and understand. So I applaud them for that. Okay. All right. Duke, yes.
hi, John. Just a thank you for the speed at which we're going to in building the partnership to work together with Board of Ed in a challenging year. Thank you for that. It moves the process along. Out the report his finance team have done. We'll continue to monitor this through the finance committee meetings and at the board table, and continue to work with you on the reporting and stay in touch as this continues to evolve. But thank you very much.
Absolutely happy to do it. I feel bad about the public comments not actually coming through or in a way that I'd hoped. So I would encourage anybody who's watching to please, the next time we have a meeting, be sure to submit any comments by email or let us know. We'll work to make sure that this technology is ready for next time. But even after this meeting, if you've got public comment, please send a note to bof@darienct.gov or to me personally. We're happy to be responsive to that and want to make sure your questions are answered. So that's all I had to say. Unless anybody has anything else, I think we can adjourn. Okay, nothing else? Motion to adjourn? Okay, Rob, second. Paul, all in favor? Perfect. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you.